Hello, and welcome to Vision New England's Church in Action podcast. Here we talk with New England leaders about critical issues that impact how Christians engage in our culture to accelerate evangelism.
Hey, thanks for joining, everybody. I'm Charles Galda. I serve as the president of Vision New England. I want to welcome you to our discussion with Britt Harris. As you may have gathered, and sorry for the late start, Britt had not just an investment firm presentation just before us, a board meeting this morning. So Britt, we're thankful you could fit us in and make some time for us today. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
For those of you who may not know Britt, Britt's the president, the chief executive officer, and the chief investment officer of UTIMCO, which supports the University of, it's an endowment that supports the University of Texas as well as Texas A&M University. And I'll pause for Aggies to whoop for us, which is the largest public endowment in America. Britt was also prior to this, he was the CEO at Bridgewater Associates. He was the pension fund CEO of ABB, of Verizon, of Texas, of the Teacher Retirement System of Texas. I won't go into all of the industry recognition and awards Britt has gotten, but I will mention he's an advisor to the New York Federal Reserve Bank, the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. He's also a guest lecturer at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and I've paid for 2 kids to go to Gordon College, and he's a speaker there as well. He's also the executive professor of a very prestigious program called Titans of Investing at both A&M and UT that prepares the future industry leaders for financial markets. While Britt is a strong Texan, he's got strong New England roots too. He grew up, spent part of his childhood growing up in Connecticut, a good part of his career in Connecticut. Britt's also a believer. He's a great friend of mine. He was my Bible study teacher. And so for better or for worse, gets the credit or blame for me being here today. But he was very formative in mine and my family's early faith journey for a good 10 or 12 years at least, and is to today, in fairness. Given the disruption of the recent 4 to 6 months, we really wanted Britt to come and share. He's got a very unique vantage point from which to see what's going on in the world markets and the economies, how things are shifting due to COVID and other things, but also has a perspective on how believers can be dealing with this and how we can be leading in the marketplace, and how that can open up doors to evangelism and reaching people who might not be able to be otherwise. And so we're going to start by turning the floor over to Britt. He's got some slides he's going to walk us through about what's happening in the world, and then where some of the changes will be heading. And then after that, we've got some Q&A time planned, and we'll give you the opportunity to ask some questions too. So Britt, if you want to go, Bob will put the slides up, and he'll just flip through them for you as you're ready to move on.
That's terrific. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. I can't tell you how much I appreciate being able to speak with you. I know about your organization, and I know about the incredible impact that you've had for God over many years. You had such great leadership, and you had such great participation, and I can't take credit for Chuck Galda, but I think you've got a great leader again. So I'm very honored to be able to speak with you today. Yesterday morning, I spoke with the Dallas Fed. This morning, I spoke with our own board, and I just came from another presentation. And the reason that all of a sudden all these presentations are being made is because not just because of what's just happened, but how it's going to reshape the world going forward. And I'm going to walk you through it as well. It's going to be pretty quick, but the thing that it's going to be a lot of slides, but I'm going to be moving quickly is what I mean. And the thing that I really enjoy about this presentation is, we can tell the full story because we can bring in God into the equation, which is the great reconciler of all of our problems. So if we just take a look at the first slide, I was just thinking biblically about, what kind of example do we have from Scripture about our current circumstances, and the thing that came to mind was this scripture out of Matthew that I'm sure most of the people know, where, Jesus gets in the boat with his disciples, the men of God at that time. They go out into the water, and a great storm comes up. And the disciples are very, very fearful. Jesus is very, very calm. He's so calm, he's sleeping. And, they come and they wake him up, and, you see them, says they woke him up, and Lord, save us. Well, of course, we always need to be saved, but we're going to drown. I think that's the way a lot of people feel now, that this is just overwhelming, and, we're going to drown. And I think Jesus' response is interesting. When Jesus wakes up and says, hey, you don't have much faith. Why are you so afraid? And then the Lord, who is over everything, just gets up, rebukes the wind, rebukes the waves, and everything is completely calm. I think we're in a very situation that's very much like that. And we're very likely to be just like their disciples were, amazed at what kind of man this is. Even when the winds and the waves and everything will submit to his will. So this is not the introduction I've had in the preceding 3 meetings, but I think this is probably the most important thing of the 3 meetings. So now we'll go into just the regular presentation for a minute. So if we could, next slide. So I want you to, I don't know really how old everybody is out there. I'm 62. The markets move in cycles. Some of them are short cycles, like a year or two. Some are 4 or 5 years typically. And people forget that there's one large overarching cycle that under which all of these shorter cycles are operating. So in March, what you're seeing here on the left-hand side is the conditions in March of 1980. I came into the workforce in May of 1980. So the Fed funds rate, or the rate that the central bank charges to banks, can you believe it, in 1980 was 20%. Now it's basically zero. The 10-year Treasury bond was around 30%. Now it's under 1%. The stock market, Chuck, I want you to see this. The stock market was 100. Now it's 3,500. I have seen every single move in the stock market other than 100, although obviously a lot of stuff happened before that. And the stock market over this period of time is up 3,000%. If you look on the left-hand side and you see that thing says trailing PE, that's how much are people paying for corporate earnings. And with interest rates that high and conditions where they were, we were only paying 7 times corporate earnings, and today we're paying 27 times. So we've completely moved to the other end of the spectrum. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a crash or anything like that, but you just have to recognize, where you are. We're going to talk later on about, how we should respond. Well, the first thing you have to, in any kind of response, is you just have to define reality. And, we're just going to go to a new reality. It's not necessarily better or worse. It's just not the same as it was. When you look at down at the bottom, just look at the price of oil. So in 1980, the price of oil was $36. Today it's 43. In 40 years, the price of oil, has gone up less than $10. Remember, at this point in time, we were completely dependent on foreign sources of energy. And in 1979, everybody was walking around wearing a pin on their lapel, which was a Nehru suit probably at the time. And it said WIN, W-I-N, whip inflation now, because inflation was 12%. Well, we have whipped inflation into, it's just destroyed at this point. And inflation now is, we're trying to get it to 2%. And the Federal Reserve just came out within the last few weeks and said, look, we're not trying to whip inflation down now, we're trying to whip inflation up. And so it's a totally different environment. People, unless you get up to literally 30,000 feet, you really can't see it. But in order to understand the world, you've got to understand this. So if we're moving on. So this year, I'm going to skip, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but so here you're just seeing what's happened so far from the lows. So the market came into this year expecting the economy to rise 1.7%. It thought inflation would be 1.7%. And for those of you who don't have any reason to follow this, that's very normal. This is going to be a very boring year. It's going to be simple. Nothing's going to happen. There's a reason that they call these things shocks. It's because nobody expects them. And so the market had its fastest decline. I'll show you in a minute. But then we had the fastest response from the monetary system and from the banking system. And so if you look at this, if you had invested on March the 23rd, your stock portfolio would be up, over 50% just in the next 5 months. The whole, if you invested just in anywhere in the world, you would, in the stock market, you would be up about 50% because we created an $11 trillion hole, as I'll show you in a minute, with how we handled the pandemic. And then we fill that hole much faster than anyone expected it's like you're playing cards and somebody plays an $11 trillion card and says, I call, and the world is shocked and it's kind of like game over. And then the world shocked, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department shocked the world when they came down. They sat down and said 11.1 trillion, game over for the time being. So I'm going to show you kind of how this happened now in a series of slides. Next slide. I guess I'm going to do this first. So the second quarter, you see that minus 32% number. That's an annualized number. On a quarterly basis, it was down about 9 or 10%. This was the biggest economic decline, that we've had since 1940, because this is the first time we've shut the economy completely down. And so the second quarter, the world just stopped. We're all forced to shelter, all those kind of things. And we took this massive economic hit, but that's past. So if you look at this quarter, the economy is expected to rise from this lower level by 24%. It's actually expected to rise more than that. This chart's a little bit dated. So for those of you, again, who don't have to bother with this stuff, first of all, lucky you, but if you see a number of 2 or 3%, that's kind of, if you see a number of 4%, that's crazy. Now we're seeing numbers of 32, 24. And so this economy, we're going to end up with the economy being down about 4% when we thought it was going to rise by, this says 1.8. But then next year, the economy is going to continue to rise by 4.3%. And so we've already passed through the recession and we're now into the recovery. The recession took about 5 years off of our growth. The recovery is expected. Remember, let me just define this. So there's 3 parts of the cycle. You have the recession, which let's say you go from $100 down to 70, 100 to 70. And then you have the recovery where you go from 70 back to 100. Those things happen pretty quickly. And then you have the expansion, which is usually lasts 3 or 4 years. And so we're already, from a financial market point of view, we've already passed the recovery because we're already at all-time highs, but we're not past the recovery stage in the economy. So look at the next chart. Just kind of walking through now. So what happened. These are just pictures. So the Imperial College report, first of all, we hear about China's having a problem in Wuhan. We hear about that in early January. We find out that it actually happened in December and that a bunch of people have been let out of Wuhan and this thing gets out of the country and starts to spread around the world. And the Imperial College is in the UK, and they're apparently the world's foremost authority on viruses. Somebody has to be. And they create a report and they distribute it around the world. So they walk into President Trump's office and they say, we have a report. I need to give it to you right now. And it says this virus is out. And if you don't take certain actions, sheltering at home, wearing a mask, social distancing, all those things, 3 million people are going to die pretty quickly. This was an estimate, of course, and so there were no caucuses, there were no discussions with Congress, there was no time. It just, all the leaders in the world just walked out and said, shut everything down. And so we've seen this virus come through here. This happens to be our region, but it's pretty typical for, you guys are even further ahead of us than we are. And you experienced worse than we did. So I know you all have been through a lot of pain and suffering, and I know it's terrible. It's also a great opportunity. But so we're now on the backside and hoping we don't get a second wave. But this we're still not through it, and this mentality is still there. And this is, for instance, I hadn't been in the office for 2 or 3 months until yesterday. Now I'm back. JP Morgan, by the way, just announced that they want all their salespeople back on September the 21st. And JP Morgan is the bell cow. They were the first ones to announce to go home. They're the first ones to announce to go back. So you're about to see potentially a big surge of people going back over the next 2 months. All right, so let's move on. So this is the virus came up. Now then we had the oil situation, what I already talked about. It came very shortly after that. Next page. We looked at all the viruses because there's so much. It's very easy for people in our what do we want to know? Said I want to know about viruses. So boom, 5 minutes later we see every virus in the last 100 years, and unfortunately, people in my job are not asking how many people are going to die. It's kind of what's going to happen to the stock market. And so you see all the viruses before. And it turned out to be the case that 6 months after all these viruses, and these include the ones Zika and Ebola, and, MERS, all these things. And it turned out that 6 months after the virus occurred, the stock market on average was actually up 8.5%, and no market was really down very much. So it seemed like we're making too much out of this deal, and we probably should buy, because this was our history. Now go on to the next chart. And all of a sudden, the world comes out and says, we're going to treat this virus completely differently than we've ever treated any other virus. The way I want you to think of it is, when problems happen, you can spend $100 to solve 90% of the problem. And then you say, well, what if I want to solve 95% of the problem? How much does that cost? And in my silly example, it costs $1 million. So up until now, the world has always taken the $100 for 90% of the solution. This time, we've come out and said we're going to spend the $1 million for an additional 5%. Now that's all illustrative. I don't want to be too precise on that. And when that was announced, we had the biggest decline, the fastest and steepest decline we've ever had in history. And in 3 weeks, the stock market goes down. It ended up going down a full 34%, which is actually normal bear market, but it was the speed of it and so now we're not on the original pandemic. This is a whole different way of reacting to this thing. What other markets have had this kind of speed of a decline and magnitude? And boy, out of the pack jumps two completely different scenarios. One of them is the Depression. The other one is 1987, which turned out to be an event. So we jumped to a completely different model, and now we think we got to figure out if this is a depression or if this is an event, and we were on that model until we saw what's about to come up. Next slide. So what you're looking at here is how we finance things. And so when we have financed this, the proper model for this is we're financing this as if we're at war. We financed this in pretty much exactly the same way we financed World War II. And when this happens, you basically drop all the normal parameters, and you just see it as a survival event, either medically in this case, or in terms of our global supremacy. And it says, do as much as it takes for as long as it takes, no matter the cost, and we'll deal with the fallout later. So we've financed or spent almost half of our the economic worth of our society, and this is being financed as a war. So to simplify, and this is not simplifying, this is just how it works. In World War II, somebody said we're going to go to war, And the question was, how many tanks do we need? How many troops do we need? How many ships do we need? How much do we need in supplies? And they figured out it's going to cost $100, and then they go to the central bank. They go to the Treasury Department and say, how much do we have in the bank? Treasury Department says, in this case, I have $3. And so they say, well, we need another 7. So they just go to the central bankers and say, I need you to finance 7. And they use it to buy tanks and guns and supplies and troops and all that. This is the same thing, except we didn't go to a traditional war. We're fighting a war against a virus. And so we raised the money that was required to stop the economy, but keep money in the hands of small business and individuals while the war was waging. And that has been, I'd say, only moderately successful, but it's exactly the same reaction function as a war. So moving on. So what you see here on the left-hand side, so remember I talked about monetary, the central bank, they basically borrow the money that you don't have in the bank. And the fiscal side, this just means that the bank or the Treasury Department. And so what you see here is on the blue, that was the great financial crisis. So we started trying to finance the great financial crisis 200 days out, and we kept financing it for a year, for almost 2 years. And you see that last line where it got to, that was the great financial crisis, and it was the biggest response we ever had. The red is this time. We financed in the first 100 days, or spent in finance in the first 100 days, more than we spent or allocated in fiscal resources than we did for the entire 2 years of the great financial recession. This is an evolved Treasury Department and an evolved central bank. They're, don't complicate these things. They just, after the great financial recession, they looked at themselves and said, well, we got through it. So congratulate everybody, but now think about what would we do differently? And they said, well, we should have gone early and we should have gone bigger. So it's just like a football playbook. They said, let's put a play in there that says go early and go big. And then they just sat on that, waiting for something to happen. It took 10 years for something to happen. When it happened, they said, okay, let's run that play. And it shocked the world and it filled the hole. Next slide. So we're moving to this new paradigm, and I'm gonna walk you through some of these things. Let me just watch the time here. So just go on to the next. So we're already moving into this category. So I know this slide looks crazy, and people, a lot of you probably don't have to look at any charts. This looks like a really complicated one, but let me just explain to you, it's not complicated. If you look at the black line, that's how much debt we have relative to the size of our economy. So just think of that as your mortgage, relative to the, and so in 1980, the debt relative to the size of our economy was very low. As a matter of fact, we were under levered. We didn't have as much debt as we could actually take on. But one of the reasons we didn't take on a lot of debt is the green line is what the interest rates were. So every time you took out $100 of debt, you paid 13%. That'll kind of slow you down in terms of taking on debt. But we moved to this new era that we're just ending now, and we started to whip inflation. We put the discount rate at 20%, like I said earlier, and all of a sudden inflation starts to come down. And when inflation comes down, the interest rate comes down. And so when you put out $100 of debt, what you pay on it is less than you paid before. So the increased debt is being offset by the lower interest rate, and also by the fact that the country is growing at a reasonable rate. And so people have complained about the debt. Oh, it's doubled, it's tripled, whatever it was. And that just was not the right analogy, because that's not the whole equation. The whole equation is, can you afford the debt? And whether you can afford it or not depends on the interest rate you're paying, how fast you're growing, and what your interest expense is. Interest expense is relative to the size of your economy. So I don't know if I have it on the next page or not, but go ahead and flip over. I don't. So this is another point. But so the interest expense that we paid relative to the size of the U.S. economy was actually lower. It's lower now than it was in 1980s. But now we've used declining interest rates to make it lower, and reasonable growth to offset it, and it's been fine. But this we knew this situation was probably going to occur. We thought it would occur maybe 10 years from now, but the response to the virus has catapulted 10 years forward, and we've sort of crossed the Rubicon. In what you're seeing here is a typical portfolio that is generic for people. And it's a portfolio of 60% stocks and 40% bonds, and the bonds are just 10-year treasuries. And so how much income did you get from that portfolio? So, in that combination, in 1980, you got about 9.5%. Now you're only getting 1.3%. Again, total shift. And you just think about all the people who don't have a lot of net worth, and people who are living on fixed incomes and things like that. It's just a completely different scenario. But it's the result of 40 years of disinflation that is now going to try to be reversed. Next slide. During this period, the U.S., again, for those of you who are younger, in 1980 to 1987 or 88, we were ending a Cold War. We were fighting the Russians, and we basically bankrupted the Russians through the acceleration of the need to buy more and more nuclear bombs for some reason. And we were all afraid of nuclear annihilation. And we defeated the Soviet Union, and we became the world's sole superpower. We entered into what I want you to think of as the American Empire, like the British Empire, the Roman Empire. And so you see here, the black line is the performance of the U.S. markets relative to the rest of the world over this period of time. And we're 170% outperformance relative to the rest of the world. And this is as a result of the global dominance that we've had, which may be shifting now. So moving ahead. Where is it shifting? So now we have China coming up. So here, the blue line is the GDP, or the size of our economy, and the red line is the size of China's economy. And what you see here, obviously, is that we're still the dominant economy in the world by quite a bit, by the way. This is not like they're 1 or 2 feet behind us, but they've narrowed the gap quite a bit. And then you look at the right-hand side, and you see some things and you're going to see some charts that at least amaze me. There's a thing called the Global Fortune 500. And today there are more Chinese companies on the Global Fortune 500 than there are US companies. Now, they're not as big, but they're great. They're bigger in number. So this is all about China rising. Go on to the next slide. Can you believe this? The red line is the retail sales in China on an annual basis, and the blue line is us. China now has more retail sales in a typical year than we do. And let me tell you, folks, we're good at spending. But they have 1.3 billion people, and so they have more retail sales than we do. The right-hand side is a gauge of geopolitical power. We're still the dominant power in the world. Our Navy is our central weapon, but they, through their influence and growth, have sort of closed in. So there's a question about whether or not the U.S. is going to continue to be the sole superpower, and we're going to have to figure that out. But the next slide shows you a change in attitude of Americans towards China. So the green line is favorable. Americans think favorably of China. The blue line is disfavorably. So just 10 or so years ago, half the economy thought everything was, China was fine. We were getting cheap sneakers, and that seemed like a good deal. Today, because of a sense of what I've just described, 2/3 of Americans, think disfavorably of China, and only a quarter, think favorably. This next 5 to 10 years is going to be a negotiation about whether or not we can coexist these two countries together or not. So let's move on to the next slide. So I've just got 2 more here. And we're talking about major transitions. So remember, I talked about the energy price and the fact that we went from energy dependence to energy independence. So the energy sector, the traditional hydrocarbon, dare I say it, producer in this country is a hero. They're heroes. They took us from energy independence or dependence to on foreign sources to energy independence. So we are not reliant on OPEC or things. So it's a freedom that we created through massive innovation in that sector. And energy was the #1 sector in the world in 1980, and now it's basically not even a sector. It's gone from 20% to 3%. And ExxonMobil just got delisted from the Dow. I mean, this is a hallmark. These are signs. So this company that used to be the biggest company in the world, Exxon, can't even stay in the Dow now. So we've shifted to an emphasis on renewables. And this could be really good, and it could be really bad. I hope it's really good. So on the left-hand side, you see how we generate electricity, and you see where we are now. And natural gas is 37%, and in 2050, it's still going to be around the same. It's going to be a higher number, but it's going to be the same percentage. You see here that nuclear goes down. You see coal goes down, and you see renewables, go from 19% to almost 40%. So they double in size. On the right-hand side, you get a microscope view of what of that green section of what renewables are. And so you see here that the two that are really at the vanguard, but very, very early in their life cycle, the number one is solar, which is basically nothing now, and it goes to half of the renewables in 2050. And you see that wind, stays at about a third, and everything else is really not that important. So you all don't have to think about this, but this is a 60 trillion with a T reallocation of assets around the world. This is the biggest shift in assets in our history from into a new sector. And this is because of a shift in the change in climate, climate issues and so on. And, and these, as you see here, the solar and particularly, it's got a lot of promise, but it's not anywhere near where it needs to be to fill this gap. So we're also putting a bet on innovation in this sector that, along the way, it's going to evolve so that we can rely on it for this much capacity. And you know what? If you spend $60 trillion on something, you're probably going to get an answer. All right, then finally, and those of you who are employers and those of you who are pastors, you may be wondering, like, what in the world is going on with my people? Well, if you're a boomer, in 1997, you were the biggest part of the population. You were 66 million people. That's the top line there. Boomers have now dropped down to 41 million people. The greatest generation is, the darker line at the bottom is only 3 million. So I want you to shift now to voting. So the one group is 44 million people, and they have a certain experience set, and they vote according to their experience set and their societal preferences. But the generation right behind us, the Gen X, has grown to 53 million. So just Gen X by itself is bigger than both of us, the boomers and the greatest generation. And then the millennials are now 56. So if you go to the polls, you got 110 against 44. So the millennials are going to outvote everybody and are outvoting everybody, and they're going to grow. And that's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing to recognize, because their experience is a lot different than our experience. This is a generation that's experienced several market contractions. They've experienced several severe, I'm talking about financial market and economic. They're having a hard time getting jobs. They're 5 years behind their parents. They see this future debt out there. And they just have a whole different experience set. And within the millennials, there are one way to simplify is there are two types. There's the me millennial, which is the one you think about. Then there's the mega millennial, which is the one you don't hear about. And the mega millennials are super productive. They still have the same societal values pretty much as the me millennials, but they're super productive and they're fantastic. And the mega millennials a mega millennial will take my place eventually. And so the mega millennials are going to be the leadership of the next 20 or 30 years. And remember, this is still a democracy, I think. And the democracy works through the voting ballot, and people vote according to what is in their best interest. And what the millennials think is in their best interest is not the same thing that we thought was in ours. So lots of shifts. This is a very unusual presentation to make because this kind of thing only occurs maybe once in a lifetime. All right, that's it. So how would you like to proceed? I can't hear you, Chuck. You're on mute. Or am I on mute?
There we go. No, it's not you, Britt. Sorry, I just needed Bob to take me off mute. Thanks for doing that, Britt. I appreciate it. There's so much of it. I want to shift gears and talk about, so as we're business leaders, whether we're in the marketplace or leading churches, and so we're leaders, mostly leaders on this call. I want to shift that. Before we do that, I want to ask you a question, or maybe this leads into it. As believers, so we just heard tons of debt, China, huge disruption, $60 trillion reallocation of assets that may or may not be a good move. Should we be optimistic or pessimistic?
You know what? Pessimistic people sound smart. Optimistic people win the day. So always be optimistic, but also be realistic. We're just going to shift, our priorities, and we're going to focus more on growth, and we're going to focus more on productivity, because with all this technological innovation, we haven't had much productivity. It's just we're going to get there a different way this time. So first of all, Christians should never be pessimistic. I'm pretty sure the Bible says, do not be afraid about 1 billion times. But I'm also pretty sure that I've been human my entire life. So I haven't been able to live up to that standard. But, there's never a time that we should be pessimistic. There's never a time that we should be afraid.
And so I've got a few questions for Britt, but if folks have questions, if you're on the Zoom, if you want to pop some questions, and we'll try and get through some questions too. So Britt, on the call, we've got folks who are business leaders, and they may be C-suite or the CEO, or they might be pastors who are leading a church, but both of them are dealing with some similar issues in some cases, right? Some folks are doing gangbusters right now, and then some folks are dealing with supply chain disruption, customers impacted, so revenue down, layoffs, uncertainty, personal financial challenges, family issues, maybe even some deaths related to COVID, or just deaths in difficult circumstances because of COVID. Concerned about survivability of their business or their church. And so regardless of what our situation is, which of those, or if you want to speak to them separately, but what should we be focused on? And what are some key things we ought to be doing?
So I'm going to answer that in two parts, kind of the business side and then the personal side. So, on the business side, we have to accept the situation that we're in right now. Don't deny it, and you have to adjust the financial circumstances of your business to adjust to these new circumstances. But remember, this is going to pass. This is if I was talking to somebody important this morning, and they said this will be over by the end of next year. So you're going to have to operate on two fronts. One is sort of the survival mode, but the second front is preparation for when this problem passes, and so that you can you have what you need to grow. Obviously there's a lot of consolidation that's going on in here. So your finances need to be very, very conservative, during this period of time, but not so conservative that when this rolls over, that you're not prepared to prosper or to flourish, on the other side of this. If you're not technologically sophisticated, you're in trouble. And I just was speaking to someone about retail, and this relates to whether you're in business or whether you're church. The primary overarching philosophy before this happened was have the customer come to me, have the parishioner, come to the church. Get in your car, drive to the business, drive to the church, experience the worship service, look around the shop. Now it is, you better be able to come to them. If you're a retailer, kind of like I'm going to bring my services directly to you. I'm going to make it very easy for you to do business with me. I'm going to customize to exactly who you are, and I'm going to make the whole experience high quality and simple. Even just so I'd never. First of all, let's just this thing we're doing right here, Chuck. How many times did you do this before March?
I did a lot, actually. Yeah.
Okay. I'm asking the wrong guy.
That's not normal.
Yeah. So let's just use myself. Then I'd never done it once. Now I do it 5-6 times every day. It's a completely different relationship. You're coming to me. I'm not flying to where you are, or you're not flying to Austin. Both great places to be, by the way. But this is our experience that we're having, and it's got some benefits, and it's got some huge flaws as well. God's people, never compromise in terms of God's word, but we evolve in terms of how we preach the gospel and how we help people along the way. We've only got 2 jobs, right? Love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and consider other people more important than ourselves. It's pretty simple mandate. And the way people want to be helped now is different than it was 5 months ago. But you're going to have to be able to do both. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the pastor section. But for now, you just have to recognize that don't panic. Always say to yourself, what are you focusing on? Are you in a business sense, are you focusing on the problem? Or are you focusing on the solution? There's no point focusing on the problem. No point whatsoever. All of your energy should be focused on what is the solution. And you will find the solution that way, but do not overreact. Make the adjustments, but do not overreact to it, because we're going to come out of this thing. And so you're going to have to walk this line between conservative operation of your businesses and but also preparation to take advantage of demand when it returns, and it will return.
Britt, is there some stuff so how should we in the workplace, or how do you in the workplace in times like this, how do you reflect Christ to people?
I got 2 people in here with me right now, and they probably say I don't. So we're not going to take a vote on that. But I think the advantage that God's people have is that we know the bigger picture. And there's only two global views in the world. They all start with, does God exist? And there's yes men like you and me, and people probably on this phone call, and there's people who say no. And it doesn't have anything to do with whether you're good or bad, or whether you're smart or not smart. It's just a decision that you make. And then that affects, in an unbelievably significant way, how you think about life. So I believe God exists. Now I got to define which one it is. It's the God of the Bible. And I'm a seeker of truth, as hopefully everybody is. If you're a seeker of truth, you need to say, well, what is their source of truth? So all of us face difficulties about what's good or bad, or just or unjust. And, so my source of truth, I believe God exists. My source of truth is the Bible. I try to be a person of integrity. And so therefore I comply with what the Bible says as much as I can. If you don't believe God exists, then you're kind of on your own. Because you got to make the same decisions that everybody else makes about what's good or bad, or just or unjust. But they just they have a different philosophy. And so they base it on science, or they base it on philosophy, or they base it on politics, or they base it on celebrities, or typically, and of course we do this as well, they just kind of gather a lot of information and they make a decision themselves. So the minimum definition of God is who gets to decide. And for me, I don't get to decide if I have any kind of integrity. And by the way, I don't want to decide. But so I always am able to go to scripture to guide me. Then when it gets down to problems, Chuck, and this is really the answer to your question, and there's maybe two parts to it. Yes, both believers and non-believers, are there problems in the world? And of course, we both say absolutely there are problems in the world. On our side, we say, well, all kinds of problems, but the biggest problem we have is that people are not they're lost. They're not reconciled to God. That's the biggest problem we have. If you don't believe it, God exists, then obviously you come up with something else. So pollution or race situations, or income inequality, or healthcare, all of which are super important. And obviously we on God's people side believe the same. They're huge problems. It's just not the main problem. But then it really gets down to how the problem's going to be resolved, whatever you believe the problems are. And so, for God's people, we're not the solution to the problem. Chuck, I hate to tell you, you're not the solution to the problem. I'm glad you and everybody that's listening to this call are doing your part, but we're not depending on you. Thank the Lord, we're not depending on me. We're dependent on God. And so our resolution is God's love is the answer to the problem, and we're going to have faith in that God. And because we have faith in that God and His love, we have unbounding hope. Like, I have no idea how this thing is going to work out, but I've read the end of the book, and I believe in God, so I don't have to panic or worry quite as much. On the other side, you don't have that to rely on, and so remember, these are wonderful people. I've got lots of friends who are fantastic people. They just have made a different decision than I have. And they see problems, and their solution is not God. Their solution is their own courage. Used to be that they bring what's going to solve the problem. It's going to be, well, I'm going to bring more reason to this thing, more science. And obviously, we're all for science. It's just not gospel. And so courage, reason, and then the answer is kind of like, we're just going to have to face reality, because you can only do so much, and you can't really solve the problem. So if you were to divide those two philosophies into human beings, the Christian philosophy is C.S. Lewis, and the world's philosophy is Sigmund Freud. That's that when you rely on yourself, your own experiences, and you just have to face reality, that's almost the definition of Freudian. So they don't have the same, Christians have so much more available to them to get through these kind of situations. Our problem is we don't take hold of it.
Thanks. We've got, as you know, business people, church leaders, parachurch leaders, and I know you've got some words you want to give to pastors in particular, and we didn't say it coming in. Britt's a pastor's kid, but let's come back to that in a minute. There's a bunch of questions coming in. The bulk of them have to do with debt. And,
yeah.
Right. And so, I've raised, every time we talk, I raise the same issue.
Yeah, for like 25 years.
Right. and so we've got all of this corporate debt. We've got all of this national debt. We've got state debt. We have piled up that works, as you said, works now because interest rates are low. But at some point, do we not have to pay it back, inflate our way out of it, or do rates rise that now we can't afford? So when does that become a problem, or how does that become a problem to us?
Well, all debt doesn't become a problem until your operation is not large enough to pay the debt, because you've stopped growing. Because all of this has to do with not how much debt you have, it's how much interest expense you have to pay relative to the size of your operation, and whether or not you have the wherewithal to either pay the principal in the end or roll the principal over. So you've got to stay, to roll it over, obviously you got to stay, high quality. So you got to bifurcate your question though, Chuck, between the government and us normal people, because I'm pretty sure you don't have the ability to print money. If you do, we need to turn you into the police. So every American, took on about $60,000 in debt because of the way that we have financed the pandemic. And the typical American makes, let's just say $55,000 or $60,000, somewhere in there, big range, of course. And so for somebody to take on $60,000 in debt that only makes $50,000, and that's kind of a big deal. Why doesn't it affect them? Because you should think of it as a balloon payment. They're only paying the interest cost, and they're not paying any of the principal, and the principal is a balloon payment that happens later on. And because we have the ability to print money, that balloon payment never comes. Now, obviously, as long as everything is, and so like I said, you and I have discussed this for years, and I have unbelievable respect for you, as you know, but I never thought this was a problem, because I knew our economy, felt like our economy was big enough, it was growing fast enough, we were able to offset it with lower interest rates and so on. And we were in a regime where all the global powers were on board for lowering inflation and lowering interest rates. So it just wasn't a problem. Now our economies, the recovery in our economy is going, if we don't do something, the recovery in our economy is only going to be about 1.5%, and that's just not sufficient growth. And because we're going to try to stimulate inflation, normally interest rates follow inflation, so you get less growth, you get higher interest rates, and your debt service, goes up. And if people begin to believe that you're not safe, now this is not, we're so far, people talk about this, but we're the safest country in the world by far. But if people, even at the margin, begin to believe you're less safe than you were before, then, people, a lot of people who buy our debt are not Americans, and they just kind of start to, invest elsewhere. And so so it's just like, people make it complicated because they think the government operates differently than any business, and it doesn't, except for this one little thing, which is they can print the money. So the thing that I've learned over all these years is, if we're talking about these problems and we know about them, or maybe you didn't know about them a little while ago, now you know about them now, and they're just, don't even think of them as problems. Just like, this is the new reality. And just like when we had too much inflation, we had to defeat it, and we did, and we went into a different kind of world, and everybody did fine. Now we're going to go into a different kind of world, and if Hitler's any guide, we'll adjust kind of how we allocate resources and things like that, and we should be fine. But we're in this transition period where you got a lot of this, uncertainty, and of course you have this time, it's a pandemic. Now, remember with the war reference, there's a big difference here in that in a war, World War II or whatever, a small percentage of us actually went to war. And we went to another country and we fought and we persevered, but people died. And most of us just stayed right here and we prayed for them, and we sent them, cookies, and we geared up our industrial sector to send them what they needed. But we were not in the war. We were supporting the war. This time, every single American is in the war. They feel like the war is right at the end of their driveway. And, so this shifts the mentality, of this whole situation. But I think God says, do not fear. What is it, like 54 times in the Bible? Like he's got, I made some good people down there. I don't mean good like we're really good, but I mean, I created a pretty special human, but they still didn't be told 54 times not to be afraid. And if you're me, I still don't get it. But fear is not going to do anything for you. Fear paralyzes you. Fear does not come from God. And you cannot succeed if you're paralyzed, and you cannot succeed if you're not operating according to God's principles.
And so, Britt, give us, you grew up in the church, right? Son of a pastor, grandson of a pastor. Your church leader. Everybody on this call is a church leader, even if we don't run a church.
No.
But what are things you think we need to hear?
Well, the first one is what I just said, which is stop focusing on the problem, start relying on God, and start focusing on the solution. It's, there's a thing called the Pareto Principle, which all of you, I'm sure, know. You got to start focusing on the 20% that's actually going to make a difference, and stop being distracted by all the ancillary things around. You got to decide, this is what we're going to stand for. This is who we are. And then you got to put all of your effort, into that. But nobody can do that when they're fearful. Nobody can do that when they're not, particularly a Christian, when they're not, relying on God. We have a true self and we have a false self. The true self operates according to God's principles, and the false self operates according to the world's principles. The biggest advantage we have is the true self that we have. And so while the world is panicky and people are focused on the problem, that's not the calling of the Christians. That's not the mindset that we're told to have. We're supposed to focus on the solutions, both reconciling people to God, but there's only two. I'm pretty sure there's still only two commandments that everything hangs on, and the second one is to help people. So I think we should be helping people, I'm pretty sure.
Good advice. And we're certainly finding where we're doing that, right? It opens all kinds of evangelistic doors because people are surprised to be helped by somebody, and that we're willing to disadvantage ourselves to help them. There was one other question I wanted to ask you about debt that I missed, and it came back up again. And I know you're not going to give us financial advice, but maybe muse, because I've tried that before and I never got anywhere. But muse, if you will, should we be thinking about taking on debt now while rates are low, or if we're going to take on debt, or would it be better to wait? And how do we think about fixed? And I think you're not going to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But
yeah, that's a good try. The answer to all these things is it absolutely depends on what your financial circumstances are and what they're going to be. There's not a prohibition against debt in the Bible, but there's a huge prohibition against imprudent debt. So, you see the big, I'll just talk about the upper levels of society. I don't mean people, I mean companies. The companies that are monsters, and now we have these 5 companies that dominate, Amazon, all these are $2 trillion companies. 2 trillion would be the 11th largest country in the world. So Apple would be the 11th largest country in the world. So these are not companies anymore; they're corporate countries, and they've got a huge amount of cash flow coming in. But they can finance all they want, and they can just store it up for later on. But as an individual, I think we're charged to our starting position is to be very conservative with any debt that we take on at any interest rate, because Christ talks so much about money, and the reason he talked about it is money. What's the purpose of money? The purpose of money is to actually do good in the world, and that he can pass it through his people so that needs can be met. I believe God could still rain down manna if he wanted to, but he doesn't. Apparently, that's not how he does it. He looks for people who are good stewards, and and they're provided with the money because they steward it well, and they pass it on to where it needs to go. And that's the purpose of money, and that's supposed to be our attitude, and that's supposed to be how we the result of it in our own lives. But most of us, unfortunately, don't handle money in that way, and through debt or whatever it is, either you are the master of your money or your money is the master over you. And I was actually asked one time to look at completely revamping Social Security. And I got a chance to look under the hood of the American people, and we're the most prosperous society in the world overall, but too many of us are living, too close to the edge. Some of it is not our fault, and some of it is our fault. But so every person of God is called to not allow money to become their master. If you're having to make decisions because of your debt, then you're not the master. The debt is the master. And there's a saying that says, money is a wonderful servant, but a ruthless master. So your answer to your question about debt is, if it's going to make you the servant, don't do it.
Do we know, Brett, whether the worst is behind us in terms of things like layoffs, we're starting to see stuff this week again where like United's laying off, and so is that the start of a trend, or is it too soon to know?
It's too soon to know. I certainly don't think that we should think that we're at the end of the layoffs. Okay. And again, I don't know the answer to this question, but the Federal Reserve has just said our main mandate is full employment. Remember just a few months ago, we were under 4% unemployment, and we skyrocketed up to 15% in no time. And now we're back down to, it said 8%, but it's actually higher than that. This is a kind of an anomaly. And next year it's expected to be 7%. So, and companies now have thinner margins or less demand, and they'll make the adjustments. But one of the great things about our society is that as long as we maintain flexibility, then we will absorb any kind of adjustment that's made in the way the employment works with new growth and with new industries. But the unemployment rate is probably peaked, but I don't think you should operate under the assumption that the layoffs have peaked.
And so let me let's just shift to, because I want to make sure you have time. So we're a little bit over what we planned. So I know some folks are needing to drop, and I know we'll lose you at some point too, Britt. But it sounded like you had some stuff you wanted to share specifically for pastors.
I do, and I hope it applies to everybody. And so if you can stay, I hope you will, and I'll stay all day from this point. For Chuck Gallagher, I'll do pretty much anything.
Thanks.
Mostly for Chris Gallagher, but we're going to pretend it's for Chuck Gallagher. Okay, let me just show you a few things. I was asked to make a presentation a couple of months ago to pastors down here, and I just got a chance to think about it, and I'd just like to share that with you all now. So we could put up that first slide. When it comes up, you're going to see a passage. We're going to talk about Nehemiah. So, nope. So it's this should start out with the same scripture that we began with.
Yeah, Bob, I think it was later in the deck. You've got to go through some more slides, maybe.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and start talking about it while we're making the transition. So as we make this transition, again, just a reminder that we have a bigger picture. We have more of the story. We have a greater toolkit to respond, and we have a command. So the first slide here is again the same slide that I didn't go over this. This is later on. If you want, this is a question you should ask probably later. That's about like what's going to happen. Actually, go back to that slide for a second. So this is when this happened, when the pandemic started. I had a competition. I issued an edict or a competition to about 100 people around the country, and I said, if you will give me 5 ideas about how you think the world is going to change, I will give you back 500. And because I had 100 people, everybody gives me 5 ideas. And so the ideas just came pouring in, mostly because people wanted to get the 500. And some of the folks here in this room with me right now, really did a lot of the work on this. But we were one of the first people to come out with what what might occur. And this report, because it was a good report, and because it was early, went all the way to Google to look at. So I'm not making that presentation now. I'm just giving you a little bit of a taste of it. And so the first thing is just Ruchir Sharma is has been in some surveys called one of the 50 most influential people in the world. He's really worked primarily in emerging markets, and his advice was don't overreact. Like things are never change as much as you think they will. But every time we do, the second point is, every time we have a major economic event, something about common sense changes. And so something about common sense is going to change here. Let me just make that really simple for everybody. If it's 1999 and somebody comes up to me and says, before you get on that plane, I want you to take your shoes off and I want you to go through this detection system, and I'm going to have this stranger pat you down. I don't know what I would have said, but then when they went on and said, no, by the way, we're going to do the same to your wife and your daughter, I would have either said, let's take this outside, or I would have called the police. We have the World Trade Center and terrorism rises, and now we just all prance right through there. What do you need me to take off? I'll stand in line as much as you want. Sure. Do the same to my wife and child. It's just a whole new common sense, comes out. And so there will be a new common sense that will come out of this, something that would have been inconceivable before, but that will just make sense because of this pandemic. And the third here is that, particularly from a technological side, and over the debt side we talked about earlier, things that were going to take 5 or 10 years to occur have taken 5 or 10 months. So the pictures that you see here, with regard to the church, any operation that relied on getting as many people into a space as possible, is going to have some issues for a while. I know all the churches are struggling with this, and everybody's just doing the best they can. But this is, there's anything you can think of that where the ideal before was to put as many people as possible into a limited space, that's going to change. Obviously you see the computer up there, everything's going online. And then you see in the bottom right, this is tracking. This is the rise of government. So we've got to be very careful here that, because it would not have been common sense, let's say before this, to let the government track you. Now for health reasons, a lot of people are going to say, yeah, it makes sense. So so everybody's going to have to make an adjustment, and we're going to have to be vigilant and stay awake, to changing circumstances. So sorry, I forgot to mention that. There's a lot more, but we don't have time for it right now. So let's go to the church's reaction. So I am a pastor's son. I know that one of the great reasons to believe that God exists is because the church goes on with people like me in it. So here, just a reminder, again, Jesus will take care of it. And we should be relying on His love, our faith in Him, and therefore we should always have hope. And one of the things that I want to tell you about your brain is you cannot be worried and grateful at the same time. If you're worried, you just cannot. Your brain literally, this is a scientific fact, your brain can't be grateful. But if you're grateful, it can't be worried. So as I'm walking around in the world and I'm starting to feel worried, then I immediately know that I'm not grateful. And I don't care what the circumstances are, I have a lot to be grateful for, and so does every single person on this call or Zoom or whatever this is. So just, we have to, it's our mindset. Do we have faith or do we not? I think we do. So let's just start this, that's just a reminder now, the presentation here about the response. So, and this works for everybody, whether you're in a business or you're in the church or you're at home. What is leadership? Leadership is when the storm comes, you go to the wheel. So just think of yourself in this giant, sailing vessel, and this, everything is calm, and the seas are the wind is calm and the seas are calm, and the captain can stay down below and he can read his maps, and he can say, look, some of you younger folks, go up there and take the wheel and manage the ship while things are calm and safe. But when the storm comes, the captain has to go to the wheel immediately. And when he does so, you need to understand that nobody expects him or her to be perfect, but they do expect him to be present. So you either shrink from a storm or you go into it, and we're called to go into it. I also want you to think about a motorcycle rider. So I don't ride a motorcycle, but motorcycle riders have these cool leather jackets. I want one of those, even though I don't ride a motorcycle. Why do they have cool leather jackets? Because when they're going through a hairpin turn, when somebody who doesn't know about motorcycles, everything in your body wants you to lean away from it. I'm going to lean I'm going around the left. I'm going to lean away from it, lean away from the problem. The real motorcycle knows to lean into it. And the reason they have that leather jacket is so they can lean into so much that their arms can scrape the ground while they're moving. We have to learn to lean in, not to lean out. Okay, next. So, so for pastors, I know you. Obviously you're not all the same, but a lot of you take too much of the burden on yourself, and you don't really get the kind of care that you actually need from your people, and you don't allow the people around you to really participate in the solution and so some of you need to let go, and you need to bring other people in, and you need to accept care. There's a place in Matthew chapter 9, it says Jesus saw all the people and had compassion on them because they were helpless and harassed like sheep without a shepherd. That's all the people, pastors, including you. You are helpless and harassed. You have the shepherd. Let people help you. They have the gifts for it, and they want to do it. Do not carry the burden by yourself. All right, the next slide. So what's the reality? The reality here is that there's millions of people who are unemployed right now. What you hear about is the virus every single day, but I'm sure that the pastors for sure, and probably most of the people on this call know that the amount of drug abuse, depression, addiction, just general sickness has skyrocketed. And our job is not to focus on ourselves and become fearful. Our job is to focus on them through faith. Next. So when you get into a circumstance of fear, and this is just how everybody, I believe, should approach the problem. This is how we try to approach it. Is the first thing you have to do is you have to face reality, and you have to absorb the fear. This is what leaders do. They don't make people more fearful. They absorb the fear and of what the reality actually is. But a leader who just says, look, things are terrible, is not a leader. He also or she also has to bring hope. So this is a reality. That was the problem. Here, now we need to work on a solution. And so immediately you have to get people into a situation where they are hopeful, not fearful. And then you got to get to work. So this is what you have to do in every single circumstance. I forgot that I put this scripture in there. I think my fantastic assistant, put that in there, but there's the scripture that I was just referring to. So at the end of Matthew chapter 9, it's got this statement. It says the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. The harvest is plentiful right now, but the workers are too few. But I don't care if it's one or two workers. It's gonna happen. And if you go to Matthew chapter 9, which I would say is the battle chapter in the Bible, Jesus describes exactly what the situation is, and it's pretty rough. And then he gives us authority over all these things, and he tells us how to operate in the world. And he eventually concludes with, this is a chapter where he says, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And how do you reconcile the fact that the great peacemaker says, I didn't come to bring peace? Well, why do you need to bring peace? Because there's a rebellion, and peace only comes after the rebellion is quelled. And Jesus tells exactly how to operate there. And he says to take up our cross and follow him, and that's into battle. What I've learned is every time I've got it, you go into battle in a formation. You don't just go out there randomly. So just think of it as a triangle, with the tip heading into the battle, and Jesus is at the front, and there's two of us behind him, and there's four behind him, and this triangle just goes as far as it goes. And I have to ask myself, and we should ask ourselves, like, where are we in this formation? I'm pretty far back, but if we break formation, we in our own power, we're just going to get crushed. We have to do it together. Next. So these are just things for everybody to think about, but usually churches are not operated on the same principles as business. And I know that we're all wired up differently and so on, but these are just things that I think are particularly important. The 5 P's, or prior preparation prevents poor performance. So everybody sit down, face reality, start to think about, bring hope, get to work, and prepare. I would suggest that everybody consider, and this is what we should always do, like, what are the 3 words that you want your church to be known for? Pray about it, get counsel, and what do you want to be known for? 3 words maximum. And then when you have those 3 words, everything that you do should drive home those 3 words. And that'll be unique for every church, but that will give you some focus. Pareto Principle is kind of the same thing. Stop trying to do everything and start focusing on the things that are most important. That's one of the great things about a situation like this, is you're almost forced to stop doing things that are peripheral and focus everything you're doing on the things that are most important. The domino effect is interesting, because it means that when you do prepare, you prepare yourself in such a way that whatever action you take today makes every future action either easier or unnecessary. So stop looking. I think we all need to stop looking at what's going to happen next Sunday or what's going to happen next week. And we think, where do I want to be, in 2 or 3 years? And if I want to be there in 3 years, where do I want to be in 2 years? If I want to be there in 2 years, where do I want to be in 1 year? Where do I want to be in 6 weeks? 6 months, 3 months, a month, a week, tomorrow. Just because we're relying on faith doesn't mean we're not supposed to use our brains. Okay, keep going. So this was kind of right in the middle of it, and I was just trying to think, and this, obviously, I know that, down here at the church of, if you're 1,000 people, it's kind of like you're a startup. I just love my church that Chuck and I went to. We were 125 people. So I realized that this is, so just take this as a conceptual thing, but it basically starts out with, pastor, find people in your church who are godly people and give them some authority. People who are experienced, people who are godly, people who will bring different skill sets. you probably are not a CEO. You're a pastor, you're a counselor, and you're an evangelizer. There are men and women in your church who have the skill sets and want to use them that can take the responsibility off of your shoulders and frankly do better than you do at that. My dad's a pastor. People would come up to me and say, you know what, I think I could preach a better sermon than that. And I'd said, yep, you sure could. One time, try it 52 times in a row for 25 years. And everybody said, well, maybe I should go back to my corner. Do what you do really well and find other people to do the things that they do really well. And so we're in a situation now where you got to have, I think, like you got people inside your church who are hurting, and we need to have a special focus on who's going into the church to help the people who are hurting inside the church. Well, and then you have a massive number of people who are hurting outside the church. To sort of combine those into two and ask one person to go in both directions is probably not going to be really as effective as you could be. You may want to separate those two. The R&D, and I'm sorry for using business words, but that's my whole vocabulary. This is where you need people who are staying in touch with, how is the world evolving? This is primarily about technology. How should you use it? When should you use it? Where should you not use it? All those kind of things. And then fourth, pastors, there are people in your church who they're called to just help you. That's it. They're not called to help other people in the church. They're not called to go outside. They don't know anything about technology. But man, if they could just help refresh you and renew you, and take, and have empathy towards you, they would love it. I have a friend here who's a retired colonel, and that's all he does is he takes care of our pastor. I want that guy to take care of me. So this is just to give you some ideas about how you might want to think about things. Everybody's not going to do this or do all of it, but I think it's time to think a little bit more creatively than maybe we have in the past. And the past, it's what served in the past was terrific. It just may not be the same way now. Okay, moving on. So they've changed. So here's just for this didn't come out. This is not showing the way that it's supposed to show, but here's the way it works, pastors. This is just life, and it works the same way in business, by the way. If you have 100 people in your congregation, there's 20 of them who don't like you. They don't think you're preaching the right sermon. They don't think you're using the right music. They just don't like you, or they don't like what's going on. 20%, and there's 60% in the middle, kind of like everything's fine. And then there's 20% who love you, who think everything you do is wonderful. Now, and so that has to be your baseline. But as I watched my dad go through it, and my pastors that I've had since then, I know what really happens is that who do you hear from? I said there are meetings per week. So 15 meetings per week come from the people who are upset and don't like what you're doing or don't think you're preaching correctly. And you get a few people who come in that like you, and then you get, people who love you just kind of like, everything's fine. They don't really speak. And it's a great travesty for those of you who are not pastors. You should be encouraging your pastor. Don't just think to yourself how wonderful your pastor is. Tell them, because on the other side, all they're hearing is all the things that are wrong. And so at the end of a week, they've had 15 meetings from the dislike category and 5 from the other, and that goes on for a month, and then it goes on for a year. And how could the pastor not believe that there's something wrong? Because he's sitting there saying, "Look, I just had it's been a month, and I just had 60 meetings with people who told me that things are wrong, and only 20 people thought it was okay, and this has gone on forever." And when that happens, pastor, you will start to behave as if you will not know what reality is, and you will start to behave as if the people who are in the dislike category are correct. And then when you start to behave that way, the people in the middle will say, oh, I didn't know, there must be a problem. and you will cause the church to react in a way that is not consistent with reality. So I just want you to know that you just need to be aware of this. And those of us who are in I love my pastor, and by the way, everybody should love their pastor, unless he or she is not preaching, the gospel. Even then we love them. We just, those of us who really want to care for our pastor, we should be sending them notes, emails, talking to them. When you think something is great, say so. Say so, because all the people who don't think things are great, they're talking a mile a minute. Protect your pastors. And pastors, please be aware of this. And don't, you have to assess. I don't think totally ignore it, but this is the way it works. And with me, if people come in and say, I don't like you too long, it's kind of like, well, I don't like you either, so you can go work someplace else. With a pastor, you don't really have that. And so this is a circumstance that can really disrupt the church and the pastor's view of how things are going. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. I wanted to say it. And so the dislike you category, remember, I'm a pastor's son, so I feel strongly about this. These are snakes. If you're in this category, stop it. And if you're sinfully silent, start speaking up, please. Your pastors need it. Next slide.
Hey, Britt, we're about out of time too. Just
Okay.
to give you a heads up, maybe a 2-minute warning if you could.
Okay. Vote. Okay, 2 minutes. So
do what you need to do. Sorry.
Yeah, I can wrap it up. I know there's been a big controversy about going to church, not going, opening again. I just want to, pray, use your best judgment. I'm pretty sure in the Bible there were at least a couple of times where people went and sheltered in place while sickness passed by or danger passed by. So that you see them here, you know what they are. Next slide. This is just for people who want to. I'll write this out for you, or I'll send you something on. If you do have to conduct layoffs, there's a way to do it that honors people rather than dishonors people, and that's what anyone should do, but particularly a Christian should do. I'll send that to you separately if Chuck wants to do it. Next slide. And then, I'm reading Ecclesiastes. Who reads Ecclesiastes? Nobody. But maybe we should. And you've got this scripture that says, there's a time for dancing and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just reading along, and here it is in Ecclesiastes 3:5. There's a time to embrace. There's a time to refrain from embracing. Guess what? This is that time. I was very happy to see that this was, and I guess it should have been a surprise, like this God already planned for this. And he ends, that particular passage says there's nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good as long as they live. So I think, I'm going to try to focus on that. I think it's just a couple more. So it's this, why wait? Everybody out there is helpless and harassed. We need workers to go into the field, and we need to take up our cross and follow Christ. And it's not going to, it's a scorched earth kind of thing, but we have authority over it all, and because of Jesus, and we need to take up that authority and move out. Next. And then I won't go through all these slides, but I would just leave you with, I would encourage everybody to read Nehemiah. So here in Nehemiah, it starts out, I will do this one slide. It says, they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. This could be a good definition of where God's people are right now. And it says the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are burned with fire. So our walls are down and our gates are burning. And Nehemiah said that first thing he did is he sat down and he wept. and he fasted and he prayed, and he recognized reality, he absorbed the fear, and then he just moved out. So to skip to the last slide here, you just go through, we'll just skip them all, and lead by example, instill courage, devote yourself to the work, and look at this. No, not that slide, the one right before it. And so that was on day one, and God's people got together, and they went through a lot of trials, and they had to arm themselves actually, but they stayed focused on God's work, and they rebuilt the temple in 52 days. 52 days. I mean, so, you know, there's no reason to fear. But there is reason to face reality, and there's reason to get to work and rebuild the temple in ourselves and in our churches and in our society. And so I'll just leave you, Chuck, and then I'll just hang on to anybody who wants to talk. But I know you can close it out. I know you. So I'll just leave you with this benediction. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine on us, so that your way may be known on the earth, your salvation among all nations. May the people praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the people with equity and guide the nations of the earth. May the people praise God. Praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. The land yields its harvest. God, our God, blesses us. May God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. Thank you very much for letting me address you today.
Britt, thanks so much for your insights, for sharing data that we normally wouldn't have, for crystallizing it into ways we could digest it. I think I'm grateful to you for so many things, but I'm really grateful that you took today to be with us and share some of this stuff. And we've gotten a bunch of comments online in the Zoom about folks saying thanks for the encouragement and thanks for sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And so I really appreciate you being with us today. And for the folks who are on, really grateful to all of you. Hope you picked some stuff up here that's going to help you in some of the challenges you're dealing with and how we can be reaching out and serving others. I thought was just great advice that opens doors to evangelism, but leading from a position of strength in a crisis. Britt, just all great advice and great wisdom. Thanks so much. And I'd like to thank Bob Atherton, our producer. Our next podcast is September 17th. There won't be a Zoom for it. It's just Facebook Live. And we'll have pastors Kenneth Young and Chris Gepner on that. And we're going to be talking about doing something very different from today and maybe different than a lot of folks are doing. We're going to talk about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Abraham Lincoln attributed the start of the Civil War to Uncle Tom's Cabin. And we're going to talk about it in ways about how it helps us understand some of the racial issues we're challenged with today in our culture, and how it was so helpful in helping people hate slavery, something that is with us today after generations. And so that'll be, I think, a very interesting conversation since it informs so much of what we're trying to deal with today. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Brett.